Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone. Can I ask you something honest? How long have you been waiting for them to understand what they did to you before you allow yourself to finally be free? Because here is something I need you to hear, and I need you to hear it deep in the place where you've been quietly keeping score, replaying the conversations, rehearsing what you should have said. Moving on is not something you do for them. Vasir, it is something you do for the only person who has stayed with you through every single chapter of your life. Just yourself. Welcome. Sit with me for a while. I am so glad you're here. I want to talk to you today about something that almost no one talks about, honestly. We talk about forgiveness. We talk about letting go. We talk about moving on. But we rarely talk about the part that comes before all of that. The part where you are sitting in your living room at 11 o'clock at night and the house is quiet and you are replaying it all over again. Maybe it was a marriage that slowly ran out of oxygen. Maybe it was a daughter who said things that cut so deep. You still feel the edges of the wound when you reach for her name. Maybe it was a friend, someone you trusted completely, who walked away without ever looking back. Maybe it was someone who never said, "I'm sorry," and never will. And somewhere along the way, you started to believe, maybe quietly, maybe unconsciously, that you could not fully heal until they acknowledged your pain, that you couldn't quite breathe, until they understood that you couldn't release the weight until they came back. Oh, sweet friend, I want to gently take your hand right now and say, you have been holding yourself hostage in someone else's prison. And that is not weakness. That is what happens when we love deeply, when we are wired for connection and meaning and resolution, when we are the kind of woman who doesn't give up easily, not on people, not on relationships, not on the ones we love. That quality in you is beautiful. It is also, at certain points in your life, the very thing that keeps you from healing. You do not need their apology to begin your own healing. The key to your freedom was never in their hands. It was always in yours. And if there is one woman watching this right now, maybe she's your sister, maybe she's your closest friend, maybe she's someone you've been quietly worried about. I want you to think of her. If this is speaking to someone you love, take a moment right now and share this with her. Every woman deserves to hear that she is worth her own healing. Let's talk about what moving on is not. Moving on is not pretending it didn't happen. It is not minimizing your pain. It is not performing forgiveness for an audience. It is not saying what they did was okay. It is not reconciliation. It is not even forgiveness in the traditional sense, though that may come in its own time, in its own way. Moving on, true soul level moving on, is the sacred act of choosing yourself. It is saying, I have waited long enough. It is saying, my peace is not a reward I receive after their repentance. It is a birthright I claim for myself. It is saying, I refuse to let what happened to me define what happens next for me. There is a beautiful concept in psychology called emotional autonomy. It simply means this: your emotional state is not at the mercy of what other people do or don't do. It sounds simple, It is one of the hardest things a human being ever learns, because we are relational creatures. We feel things in response to other people. That is not a flaw. That is the very architecture of love. But somewhere between loving someone and losing yourself in how they've treated you, you have to find the place where you end and they begin. That place, that sacred, quiet space inside you, that is your sanctuary. Your sanctuary is not a physical place, though sometimes we find it in a favorite room, in nature, in prayer, in music. Your sanctuary is the inner space that belongs entirely to you. No one's voice echoes there unless you invite it. No old argument replays there unless you let it. No wound lives there unless you keep feeding it. Your inner peace is not something anyone can give you. And here's the harder truth. It is not something anyone can take from you unless you hand it over. Take it back, darling. Take it all the way back. And one of the most common stories that women carry, especially women who have given so much of themselves for so long, is this one. If I let this go, it means it didn't matter. Oh, that story. I know that story well. You pour your love into someone for years. You show up. You sacrifice. You bend yourself into shapes that weren't natural just to keep the peace. And then something breaks, or someone leaves, or someone hurts you in a way that feels like a betrayal of everything you believed in. And the thought of releasing it feels like erasing it. Here is what I want you to know. With everything I have in me, releasing the pain does not erase what happened. It does not mean it didn't matter. It means it mattered so much. And you have carried it long enough. It means you are ready to put down a weight that was never meant to be permanent. It means your story has more chapters left to be written. And you are not willing to let this one wound write all the rest of it. Let me take you inside something for a moment, because understanding why we hold on is sometimes the first step to becoming free. When we are hurt by someone we trusted deeply, genuinely hurt, and our brain does something fascinating and painful at the same time, it begins to seek resolution. Psychologists call this closure seeking, and it is a profoundly human response. We replay the events. We rehearse conversations. We think, if I could just make them understand, or if they would just admit what they did, then I could finally rest. But here is the thing about closure, real, lasting closure is almost never delivered by the person who hurt you. Because to give you that closure, they would have to see what you see, feel what you felt, carry a level of self-awareness and accountability that, frankly, many people are simply not capable of. Waiting for that kind of closure is like waiting for rain in a drought by standing at the window with your hand out. The weather does not negotiate. And so we wait. And waiting becomes a way of life. And before we know it, we have organized our entire emotional landscape around someone who has moved on, or who was never going to offer what we needed anyway. There is also something called a trauma bond. And it doesn't only happen in dramatic situations. It happens when we have shared significant history with someone. When our memories are tangled up with theirs, when our sense of who we are has been shaped in part by who we were to them, And the work of moving on, real lasting moving on, requires us to gently, compassionately separate our identity from that narrative, to remember that you are not defined by who loved you well and who didn't. You are not defined by the relationships that thrived and the ones that crumbled. You are defined by what you do with the life that is still gloriously in front of you. Waiting for someone to change so you can finally be okay is the quietest form of self-abandonment. The bravest thing you will ever do is decide to be okay, starting now, exactly as things are. I want to talk about boundaries for a moment, because the word boundaries gets thrown around so much these days that it has started to lose its weight. But I want you to understand what boundaries actually are at their deepest level. Boundaries are not walls. They are not punishment. They are not a way of saying, I don't love you anymore. Boundaries are the most loving thing you can do for yourself and ultimately for everyone in your life. A boundary says, I am not available to be treated this way. A boundary says, I care about this relationship, and this is what I need for it to be healthy. A boundary says, I have needs that are real and worthy of being honored. And sometimes, and this is the part that takes incredible courage. A boundary means stepping back from a relationship entirely, not because you don't love the person, but because continuing to pour your love and your energy into a dynamic that diminishes you is not love. It is sacrifice without purpose. And there is a difference. You can love someone and release them. Or you can love someone and choose not to let them live rent free in the center of your peace. Yes. So how do we actually do this? How do we move on? Not just in theory, not just as a beautiful idea, but in our real daily complicated lives. I want to offer you something practical here. Not a 5-step program, not a formula, but a framework, a gentle, sustainable way of moving toward the freedom you deserve. Step 1, name the story you've been living in, get quiet, really quiet, and ask yourself, what is the story I keep telling about what happened? Not the facts of it. We know the facts, the story, the meaning you've made of it. They never truly valued me. I gave everything and it wasn't enough. I was foolish to trust them. And now here is the crucial question that most people never ask themselves. Is this story serving my healing, or is it serving my wound? Some stories keep us safe. Some stories keep us stuck. And sometimes, often, they are the same story. Step 2, grieve it fully. One of the greatest mistakes we make in healing is trying to skip the grief. We are strong women. We have gotten through hard things. We don't want to wallow. And so we tuck the grief away and we function and we appear fine. And then one ordinary Tuesday, it surfaces in the middle of the grocery store and we are standing next to the canned tomatoes, crying, and we have no idea why. You know why. We all know why. Because grief doesn't disappear when we ignore it. It goes underground. And it waits. Give yourself permission to grieve what you lost. Even if what you lost was a version of someone you loved. Even if what you lost was a version of yourself, the one who believed in something that turned out to be different than you thought. Grief is not weakness. Grief is the price of love. And you loved greatly. You have every right to grieve greatly. Step 3, practice radical compassion. Beginning with yourself now, here is where it gets interesting, where so many of us, especially the women of our generation who were raised to give to everyone else first, get completely stuck. Compassion. We are exquisitely good at offering it to other people. We see a friend in pain and our hearts open immediately. We see a grandchild struggling and we pour out everything we have to help them. We can even, over time, find compassion for the people who hurt us. But compassion for ourselves, that can feel almost foreign, almost indulgent. Here's what I want you to practice. And I mean this literally as a daily practice. Look at yourself the way you would look at a dearest friend who was going through exactly what you've been through. What would you say to her? What would you offer her? What grace, that beautiful, unearned, freely given grace, would you extend to her without hesitation? Now extend it to yourself without negotiation, without conditions, without waiting until you've suffered long enough to deserve it. The most radical act of love you will ever perform is choosing to be on your own side fiercely, tenderly, and without apology. That's not selfishness, that is wholeness. Step 4, create your sanctuary. Your sanctuary can be physical, a favorite chair, a garden corner, a room where you go to breathe. But more importantly, create your inner sanctuary. When the thoughts begin to spiral, when the replay starts, when the old wound aches, you will practice returning to that inner space. You will say to yourself, with real intention, this thought does not have to live inside my peace. I choose my sanctuary. This is not toxic positivity. This is not pretending. This is the disciplined, loving act of choosing where you place your attention and understanding that where your attention goes, your life energy follows. Step 5, reclaim your future tense. Here is something I want you to notice. When we are deep in grief or resentment or unfinished emotional business, almost all of our thinking is in the past tense. What happened? What was said? What should have been different? What we deserved and didn't receive. Healing begins, truly begins, when we start to think in the future tense again. What do I want now? What is the next chapter of my life look when it is written with freedom instead of pain? What have I always wanted to do, see, feel, create, experience that I have been putting off while I waited for resolution that may never come? Your life is not on hold, waiting for this to be resolved. Your life is now. It has always been now, and there are still so many nows left to live. I want to end our time together talking about grace, not just forgiving others with grace, though that matters, not just moving through the world with grace, though that is beautiful. I want to talk about the grace of letting yourself down from the cross, because so many women I have known and loved and walked alongside in, their healing have been, in a very real psychological sense, crucifying themselves, staying in the pain, holding the wound open, telling the story again and again, not because it helps, but because they believe somewhere deep that suffering longer is some kind of proof of how much they loved. Oh, my dear, Your capacity to love was never in question. Your love was real. Your love was deep. Your love was given freely and without reservation, and it is still real, even now, even after everything. Releasing the pain doesn't change that. Grace says, I did my best with what I knew. Grace says, I am allowed to stop explaining myself now. Grace says, what happened to me was not a reflection of my worth. Grace says, I am not required to carry what I did not deserve. Moving on is an act of self-devotion. It is how you say to your own soul, I love you enough to stop punishing you for someone else's failures. That is not giving up. That is growing up.